Imagine, in the future when you are taking a vacation down to a beautiful Caribbean island with intentions of going scuba diving in the Atlantic Ocean, when you finally realize your dreams and take a dive in. It's not what you thought it would be. Your high expectations of colorful coral reefs are shut down when you see brittle, white branches right across the ocean floor. The coral, the animal is dead. What is happening? Why is it happening?
I mean, a certain amount of bleaching is normal, but the bleaching that we are experiencing with the sea surface temperatures as they rise every year for longer periods of time, the only thing that we can do is to curb our carbon output and reduce greenhouse gases.
Coral reefs are often mistaken as plants. In fact, they are animals and are related to anemones and jellyfish. Thousands of small animals called polyps also live inside the coral so that this problem doesn't affect the coral alone. Basically, sea temperatures have been rising consistently since 1870, and in 2002, the ocean reached their highest record ever. The future doesn't look promising. Predictions are that in the next 50 years, ocean temperatures will rise by a whole degree. When sea temperatures rise, the photosynthesis reaction that converts carbon dioxide into sugar is blocked. When this reaction is blocked, the zooxanthellae, which is another word for algae, is poisoned. In order to live, the coral must split the algae and therefore splitting some of its own tissue. By doing this, the once colorful coral becomes a bleached white color. The only way the coral can survive is if the algae grows back, and this happens with cooler sea temperatures. Without algae, the coral slowly starves to death.
So when the sea surface temperature rises, the coral evicts its algae, and that reduces, the algae provides its color. So any rise in temperature, coral is very sensitive. It needs a very set of exact conditions to live, and one of them is sea surface temperatures. Others include the depth of the water, the amount of pollutants it is exposed to. So another way that global warming affects coral reefs is when this when the level of a sea rises, it also takes away the algae's ability to photosynthesize because it doesn't get as much sunlight.
The next question we ask is, why are sea temperatures rising? The reason why temperatures are rising is because the sun heat is no longer escaping our atmosphere or easily as it once did due to a thickening blanket of carbon dioxide emissions enveloping our planet, thus creating a greenhouse gas effect. When greenhouse emissions are released into the atmosphere, they absorb infrared radiation, which is released by the Earth. When infrared radiation is absorbed, radiation heat increases. This causes a rise in the temperature on Earth, which in turn heats up sea temperatures. Coral reefs seem to suffer mostly in the eastern part of the world, off the coast of Australia and in the Indian Ocean. Australia had two major coral bleaching events in 1998 and again in 2002. Fortunately, most of the corals survived these two major outbreaks. However, in some locations, 90% of the corals were killed. However, the Indian Ocean has suffered immensely in this area. Places like the Maldives, Sri Lanka, Kenya, and Tanzania have lost 90% of their corals. According to the National Conservancy, if the destruction of corals continue at this rate, 70% of the world's corals will be gone within 50 years. Why would it matter? Well, to start, corals are animals just like polar bears, fish, and humans as well. Not only are they animals, but they provide shelter and a home for thousands of smaller living organisms. Coral reefs are also useful in the sense that they protect the ocean floor from damage. Destruction of reefs will probably result in an economic catastrophe.
Corals provide a series of benefits for humans, ranging for habitat for fisheries. So loss of coral reefs does mean loss of protein worldwide. It also provides shore protection from storm damage and erosion and things like tsunamis. So the tsunami that happened in Thailand, Thailand was greatly affected partially because a lot of their coral reefs had been devastated due to shrimp farming in the areas. Those areas had cleared out their mangroves to place shrimp farms, and the mangrove and coral reef ecosystems are very closely related. So the pollutants from the shrimp farming helped to wipe out some of the coral reefs in Thailand. So when a tsunami happens, when the reef is not there, the wave actually becomes bigger. So places like the Maldives that had intact coral reefs were very well protected and weren't as devastated as places in Thailand. It also provides economic benefit, and each area is a little bit different, but it's estimated that it's $375 billion worldwide for the economic revenue that people receive from coral reefs. A square kilometer produces about 37 metric tons of fish a year. And to give you some other rough estimates, in Hawaii, half a square mile of coral reef in a year produces about $8.6 million in tourism revenue.
Hughes magazine recently wrote, with increased human population and improved storage and transport system, the scale of human impacts on reefs has gone exponentially. This means that people living in tropic islands have grown to rely on the corals. Now that transport systems have improved and there is improved storage, more corals will be shipped out for more money. This very important and essential business cannot continue if most of the corals are bleached or killed. With a rising population, the tropical islands need the reefs for an economic standpoint. With solar waves hitting the earth, the sea temperatures rise, and so do land temperatures. This causes northern glaciers to melt, and the cold water that flows into oceans causes the salt water to be pushed down as it is heavier. This changes the water flow patterns of the ocean, which in turn affects weather patterns. It is important that weather patterns remain the same. When weather patterns are altered, areas will receive more precipitation than usual, and some areas will receive less than usual. This will then affect crop growth in places because there wasn't enough precipitation, and in some areas there will be too much precipitation, causing greater problems like flooding. Changes in weather patterns can lead to even greater problems. These problems can go to the extent of a majority of a country underground. This will then cause a huge amount of immigration. There are estimates of 50 million refugees in only 10 years. However, it's not like this cannot be prevented, and that it's a helpless case. Infrared radiations are caused with household radiations or electrical heaters. Other main causes of global warming include burning of fossil fuels, land clearing, and agriculture, all of which can be prevented to a certain extent. Humans are capable in improving all of these aspects, and by improving we can release greenhouse gas emissions and not change weather patterns. We can control our destiny for now. Coral reefs are an important aspect in our ecosystem. They are beautiful to see and are a great tourist attraction with exuberant colors and a habitat for thousands of species. Unfortunately, the corals have been turning white or bleached. The corals turn white because the zoanthalia, the algae plant that nourishes and gives the colorful corals their appealing characteristics, die off to extremely hot conditions. Without the zoanthalia, the plant turns bleached white. The only way the corals will regain their color is if the zoanthalia comes back in time to revive them.
They become bleached when the temperature is too high for them. It's like a cooking process. So what happens is the corals themselves, it's a little like tentacles, and within the tentacles they have little zooxanthellae. You might have seen a picture on the Reef Futures website with it. The little zooxanthellae are a plant essentially, and they take sunlight, and from the sunlight they are able to make sugar. The coral takes up some of that sugar, and in doing so it's able to feed just through sunlight. But the trouble is that when it gets too hot, the zooxanthellae, the little plants, they start to break down, and they disintegrate, and the coral's forced to get rid of them. And in getting rid of them, they get bleached. If the bleaching isn't cooled down quickly, then it doesn't take them very long before they start to die. So essentially it's temperature, but it's also sunlight as well.
Not only could the lack of food bleach the corals, but also extra exposure to ultraviolet rays, exposure to certain chemicals or disease, anything covering the corals, an increased amount of water from storms which could drown the coral. The biggest reason to why coral reefs are dying is because of overfishing and blast fishing. The way the fishing is going on in the reef is damaging it. Fishers use two ways to stun the fish, but don't realize that it is also affecting the coral. They use blast fishing and cyanide fishing. Blast fishing is when an explosive is thrown into the waters to stun the fish. Cyanide fishing is when a poison is thrown into the waters to stun the fish. Fishermen don't realize this, but is not only affecting the fish, but also its surrounding, the coral reef. It is our fault that the coral reefs are dying. The summer of 2006, the coral reef around the Keppel Islands experienced a warmer than usual temperatures, and in turn, 98% of the corals were bleached. 3 months later, the corals had turned white once more, because the Fitzroy River flooded the area. Thankfully, the corals had time to revive itself because the water temperatures regained their normal temperature and the zooanthelia returned to feed the corals. The corals regained their original color, but if the zooanthelia didn't return, the corals would have died.
Warm water reef-building corals live symbiotically with an algae called zooxanthellae. And the algae photosynthesizes, and that provides nutrients for the coral. It also provides the coral with its vibrant colors. When the sea surface temperatures rise 1 to 2 degrees, the coral evicts algae out, and it's not dead yet. At that point, it's in a very weakened state. And if all other stressors, including all the ones that I mentioned below, are removed and the sea surface returns to a normal temperature, the algae can come back and it can recover. But it has only a very small window of time for it to be able to recover from that.
Helps us humans in the Department of Medicine. The corals create a unique chemical compound, AZT, which are used to treat HIV and AIDS. AZT, the chemical, is taken from a sponge which lives in the Caribbean reef, and if all the corals die, the compound will never be found again. This is all happening because we care more about ourselves and not our ecosystem. Not only are the animals in Australia dying, but also animals in North America. Beluga whales and polar bears are examples. Mike Macri, an owner of a company who runs nature tours in Churchill, recently had to rewrite his brochures for beluga whales. Beluga whale watchers were encouraged to come a full month earlier. Originally, the beluga whale would migrate into the mouth of the Churchill River following the spring breakup. Because the ice was melting earlier, they arrive earlier in the Churchill River. Another case of animals being in danger because of warmer temperature is the polar bear. The polar bears have been migrating south into the town because when waking up from hibernation, they realize there is no ice to walk on. It was all melted. What they do is turn around, stay on land, and walk into cities. Animals all over the world are being affected by the increase of temperature. The added heat is affecting their ecosystem, and the consequence is that the animals are suffering.
All I can really do is look at some of the models that have been put forward by the IPCC, which is a worldwide group looking at global climate change. And I can look at those models and I can see that clearly the temperature is predicted to rise in the next 50 years by up to possibly 2 degrees. If that's the case, then there's no doubt at all a large amount of change will occur for every coral reef in the world. There will be some areas down the south where it's a bit cooler that they might get some additional benefits even from the increased temperature, but most likely not. The reason being, everyone might think, oh, why doesn't the reef sort of spread down south, or in your case spread up north, so that you get reefs just moving into the cooler areas? Well, unfortunately, cold water also bleaches coral reefs. So when you get a really cold water, a big mass of water that's very cold moving into a reef, it can also cause the same effect as very hot water. And so it doesn't really give us any security moving the reefs into cold areas, because they really suffer from the same thing after all. Every winter time they don't do very well.
Global warming is killing the corals. It's global warming that is rising the sea level temperature. It's global warming's fault to the rise of the sea level, and it's global warming's fault to the change of patterns in which the animals are living, and it's killing them.
Well, essentially the seas make up a very large sink for the temperature. So what happens in the atmosphere also happens in the ocean. The difference being is that the ocean is much bigger than the atmosphere in terms of the amount of heat that it stores. So it takes a long time to raise the temperature up in the oceans. But in the areas that matter for corals, which is at the surface, that the temperature of the surface can dramatically increase for just that surface area. And so for global warming, that surface area will raise in temperature and it will affect the reefs. Some of the unknowns that we really don't fully understand is if the sea level rises, how is that going to help the reefs cope with increased amount of temperature?
And we have to change that. We have to reverse the effects of global warming so that the animals in the world will live much longer. We can save everything in the world, plant, animal, humans alike, by using less energy, using renewable energy, and most importantly, reducing our consumption of fossil fuels. Reducing energy consumption and using it effectively will help our planet regain its older features. Making the energy uses up fossil fuels. Coal burning is just an example. If we stop using coal as our energy source, the world is already much better, and using less energy just increases our chances of survival. To reduce the consumption of fossil fuels, we have to drive less, or use eco-friendly cars. Cars are the #1 producers of CO2. That is killing the planet and creating global warming. So in the near future, if you want your kids to live a healthy life, we need to start taking care of our planet to protect the future of our kids, and their kids, and so on and so forth. The only way we can do this is if we become active in the protection of our planet.